Welcome to DeFi by Design, where we talk all things blockchain and cryptocurrency while striving to educate, empower, and enrich.
It's your boy Andy, and welcome back to the DeFi Slate YouTube channel. Smash the like button on this video, that really helps us out, and sit back and enjoy the content. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to the DeFi by Design podcast, episode 87 here today, in the midst of an interesting time in the world, in the market of DeFi, and coming off one of the most heralded events in the entire space, which is the Ethereum merge. Now it feels like it's so far in the past when it was literally all but a month or so ago. Crazy how that works. There's been so much that's happened since that really feels like, yeah, it was like a year ago. So today I have the pleasure of speaking with Matt from BlockNative, which are doing a lot of interesting stuff in the block building space. So pass it over to Rob. Good morning, Rob. It's another sunny day in Florida. Bet it's nice and warm down there. How you doing?
Yeah, doing well, man. Yeah, good morning. And, like you said, it's been about a month since the merge. It seems like proof of stake has saved the Ethereum blockchain like 400,000 ETH, which is really cool. We're just not seeing the issuance, and it's just getting the getting more bang for our Ethereum buck, which is really cool to see. And I'm generally stoked to talk to Matt here. There's been several projects that you've been a part of. Your journey it speaks for itself. I won't even kind of like talk on the journey that you've been through. I'll let you kind of go through it. And all the really cool stuff that's happening on MEV and the new world of Ethereum. I'm excited to chat, man. So I'll kick it over to you, and we can jump right into it.
Sure, of course. Hey, Rob. Hey, Andy. Thanks for having me on. I'm Matt Cutler. I'm founder and CEO of BlockNative. We build core Web3 infrastructure that sort of focused on what we call the pre-chain layer. So everything involving transactions between the time that they're an idea and they go on chain. It's all real time. It's global. It's high speed, low latency, very high availability. And we've been building now for more than 4 years. And it just so happens that the capabilities of our infrastructure are very applicable to this new market of block building. And so with the merge, we are one of the block builders. We operate a relay. We've open source code, and we're right in the middle of all of that, which is a pretty fun and interesting place to be. My background is I'm a glutton for punishment. I started building Web 1.0 infrastructure way back in 1994 while I was still an undergrad at MIT. That company was called NetGenesis, and it was the first ever web analytics business. That one, I like to say, was a 9-year overnight success, 0 to IPO. And at the time we went public, was one of the top 35 IPOs in history, which is kind of crazy. My most recent startup, I've done 7 or 8, depending on how you count, but my most recent startup was a mobile collaboration platform called Collaborate.com. That was founded on the crazy idea that people do real work on their phones, which back when we started it was sort of a heretical thing to say. And that one was actually acquired by Cisco under very favorable terms. And part of that where me and my whole team had to move from the Boston area to the Bay Area. So I live out here in the Bay Area now. And I was an exec in Cisco's collab business for about 4 years before I left to start BlockNative with some other folks. So it's been an interesting ride, to say the least. And I think the most interesting pieces of the story are still in front of us.
Awesome. Yeah, optimistic for sure about just kind of all the experience that you've had and how it's set you up for success here on this like next stage, this next phase of internet infrastructure, how it's getting decentralized and how it's starting from this kind of like flat Web 1.0, very basic framework where we can interact online. To like the transferability of value that is available on Web3. I want to get into like all the MEV stuff and like all the proposer builder, separation and kind of like how we've gotten here. Maybe you could start from the beginning and just like explain how we've arrived at this point.
It's interesting. So just to a little bit further back, I went to MIT in the 90s. And when I got there, there were computer clusters all over campus. They were called Athena clusters. And it was their Unix workstations, graphical user interface, high-speed interconnects, and they all talked to each other, and all your schoolwork was on it. You could talk to other universities and play games on them, and they were programmable and open, and it was sort of school. You didn't know any better. You just showed up, and that's the way that it was. And we later learned, like, that's the internet. And probably we as students at MIT had among the best internet access in the entire world. Like, there was others that were comparable, but like, it was the state of the art. And once we started to figure out, like, oh, not everybody else has this, it seemed really obvious that this is the future, right? That if you were inside the internet in the early 90s, it was really obvious what the future was going to be. And if you were outside the internet, it wasn't so obvious what the future was going to look like. I had the exact same reaction once I started to pay attention to Web3. Once I started to really tune into Web3 in 2017 or so, it took me a little while to start to wrap my mind around it. But once I did, I was like, oh, this is clearly the future, right? This is the way that everything's going to work. And it's really obvious if you're inside the category. It's sort of all of the advantages that you have through open programmable, composable value systems that are, enabled via decentralized technologies. And if you're outside this system, it's not at all obvious what's going to happen. And so I say that because that's why I wound up leaving a big cushy corporate job to work in, zero stage startup again. But it's also why the merge and where we are right now is so important, because fundamentally what we're building in Web3 is sort of the foundations of the next economy, and an economy which is built in such a way to be vastly more open and vastly more transparent and vastly less biased, vastly more equitable than the series of systems that it needs to sort of replace. And for folks in my perspective, my sort of point of view is, we're not going to solve the big macro societal problems that we face, like climate change and income inequality and some of the real serious challenges facing us at a global level, without a vastly more efficient financial infrastructure that frees up the economic flows that are going to be necessary to apply to some of these really big problems. So I connect what we do every single day in Web3 and what we do at BlockNative to sort of creating a better tomorrow for my children and their children. I have 3 kids, and I think a lot about sort of what sort of world they're going to be inheriting. And so what does that mean? What that means is we need to build systems which are really capable of many orders of magnitude, more transaction volume, transaction velocity, lower transaction fees than the systems we have today, that simultaneously preserve the properties of decentralization and open participation. And historically, this has been very challenging to trade off, that the trade-off is always, you can have something decentralized, but it's very slow because, decentralization means people using basically consumer grade or less hardware, which doesn't have a lot of throughput. And so the good news is anyone can participate, but the bad news is you can hardly put anything through it. That's something like Bitcoin, which, by the way, the Bitcoin ecosystem made a whole bunch of decisions very much in favor of preserving maximum decentralization, which explains a lot of what's going on in that world. Ethereum was born out of that world and is trying to sort of extend the technology and sort of be a bet on innovative and on progressivism, technological progressivism, but also wanted to preserve decentralization. Now, there were folks, other L1s that said, we can make Ethereum-like things faster, you just use bigger computers. And what you wind up with is, blockchains that are secured by a handful of entities operating 20 or fewer big, expensive cloud-based computers. And then ultimately your sort of participation in that network is ultimately at the mercy of a small number of centralized actors. So you trade off performance for decentralization. Okay, so enter the merge, right? The merge is this attempt to preserve and even enhance decentralization while setting the foundation and landscape for next generation scalability. And so the merge in many ways is a foundational shift. You move from proof of work consensus algorithm to proof of stake consensus algorithm, and you enable all sorts of the next level of innovation to happen. However, the merge was about more than just the consensus algorithm. It was about increasing the modularity of various levels of the network and this pursuit of decentralization all the way down. Most folks don't really understand that before you had a lot of computers that were doing mining to support proof of work, but the actual act of building a block, meaning which transactions were included and not included and in which order, were controlled by fewer than a dozen entities, all of which were completely opaque. And people are sort of amazed and somewhat horrified by that. We thought we had this decentralized Ethereum, but it turns out there's a small cabal of actors who decide what actually goes on chain. And that wasn't ideal. And so one of the upgrades that was made to the network as part of the merge was this introduction of what's known as proposer builder separation, where we break out the act of validating a block or deciding what's truth and the act of building a block. And now we create an open marketplace of what are known as block builders. BlockNative is one of those. And now anyone can propose, like, here are the transactions, and here's the sequence of those transactions that should be the next block, and bid against each other. And this is all in service of deeper decentralization of the network and of encouraging maximum participation at the validator level. There's all sorts of consequences to this, and then MEV comes to the fore, but that's sort of this the spectrum, right? Of, we're building the future, we're building the foundation for the next economy. To do so, there has to be certain values that are built in at the infrastructure and protocol level, and this is an ongoing project. And the merge is not the end point of that; it's just a milestone along the way, and there's more innovation to come. So, anyway, it's covered a lot of ground there, but hopefully that helps sets the stage.
Yeah, a lot of the Bitcoiners, the OG Bitcoiners for sure, still use and will continue now after the merge to use kind of the lack of decentralization argument against Ethereum. So anything like this that is included in the merge and also kind of planned will overall just help the ecosystem. But like you said, there's that trade-off between kind of performance and the amount of decentralization. And I mean, looking back, I don't think that we could want the Bitcoin ecosystem and their kind of hardcore, let's call them like libertarian, diehard believers to have changed the way that they wanted to create the system. Because I mean, without a fundamental kind of let's say a foundation of just pure, just decentralized hard money, it's kind of hard to build an ecosystem atop that. So coming onto Ethereum now, we are moving, as you say, in like this technological kind of progressive way in which we are kind of optimizing now for performance. Now we've gotten to block building, which is, as you say, a improved way of basically decentralizing the creation of blocks in the entire chain itself. And you mentioned kind of how there's a split now between the proposers and the builders. The proposer and the sequencer or something. Sorry, I missed that. But I would love to kind of hear what the key improvement is in the separation of the sequence or of that process, and how you guys at BlockNative are taking advantage of this and being active.
So okay, big topic. So we'll get into it, which is when a validator. So the network is, instead of being secured by miners solving difficult compute problems, and by the way, consuming a lot of energy along the way, proof of stake is you have validators who stake the core asset, ETH, and every now and again they get elected to be the tip of the chain. They get to decide what's in the next block, and if they basically play by the rules, tell the truth, they get a small reward for doing so. And if they play games or they try to manipulate things, they get what's called slash, and they reduce their stake. So you move from a cryptographic security model to a crypto economic security model, and there's interesting pros and cons trade-offs of it. But what's fascinating is that proof of stake has on the order of $20 billion of economic value securing the Ethereum network, whereas a Bitcoin proof of work, I think the number is like 2 or 3 billion of economic value in the form of specialized mining hardware. So you can argue that there's a larger security budget on the Ethereum proof of stake network than any other major network right now. The concern here is because you're doing less work to validate the chain, meaning you're not running specialized hardware that you have to buy. You don't have a ton of electricity that you have to power that with, that the network issues a much lower rate of reward for you doing your job, because it's actually pretty simple to do. And so this is one of the things we talked about at the outset, that the rate of new issuance of ETH has gone way down. It's often called the triple halvening, because quite frankly, if you're a validator, you don't have very many fixed operational costs, right? This is great for the supply of ETH because you actually massively reduce issuance. But if you're a validator, it's not that great because now you're getting smaller rewards, right? And it turns out that there are other ways that you can get value out of a block. One of the ways you can get value out of a block is through preferential sequencing. So it turns out with ordered financial systems, which, by the way, all financial systems are ordered because it doesn't make any sense if you don't have an ordered financial system, that turns out that the order of transactions and which transactions get in and which don't get in, there's a lot of value associated with that. And when you have this privileged position to be the tip of the chain, what's called the proposer, you can extract value from that block by manipulating the order. Okay, this is what's known as MEV. MEV is maximal extractable value. It was originally called Miner Extractable Value, but now it's been expanded to say maximal extractable value, which is basically the value that can be extracted through manipulating transaction ordering. And in certain circumstances, it can be pretty significant. And before, it was kind of a small percentage of the overall rewards. But now that the rewards per block have come way down, the MEV benefit actually is a much larger percentage. And now this becomes sort of critical for validators because upwards of, north of 60% of all of the rewards that a validator can get can be contained inside MEV. And so let's say you have one staking operation that supports MEV and another staking operation that does not. The one that does will generate higher yields. And so as someone who has ETH and you're deciding where you should put it, you're just naturally going to put it where you can get higher yield. And so what's going to happen is ETH stake will move to those organizations which are the best at extracting MEV. And this becomes a centralizing force at the validator level. So the whole thing is as you get better and better at extracting MEV, which by the way is computationally complicated. It's not easy to figure out the right ordering and to all the nuances in that. It sort of is to the benefit of large, well-resourced organizations and to the detriment of small solo stakers, which, by the way, if we're trying to maximize decentralization, we want to encourage solo stakers. This is a problem. This is a fundamental centralizing force at the core of the network, and was so much so that the Ethereum Foundation researchers decided to do something about it at the merge in collaboration with a group called Flashbots, who's sort of an interesting entity in all of this. And they developed what's known as MEV Boost, which is a sidecar. It's not in protocol. There are certain trust assumptions that go along with it, but it's an optional piece of software that validators can run and effectively outsource block construction and therefore outsource MEV extraction to specialized third parties like BlockNative that not only have the expertise and the computational resources to do this well, but then share the majority or all of the rewards with the validator. So guess what? A small solo staker at home can get exactly the same value per block as the largest staking operations in the world because they have this MEV Boost network to tap into. So what has emerged is this new market called Blockbuilding. There's a number of providers who build blocks in a competitive marketplace. So basically all the block builders compete with each other to get the privilege of specifying what's in the next block. There's all sorts of techniques and strategies that go into that. And that ultimately the validators benefit from this because they don't have to do this work, right? It just is like, not my problem. I'll let you guys worry about it, and we'll reap the rewards of that. And so far, in many ways, shockingly, that market is working and is orderly and is quite effective. There's still lots of things to figure out, and it's by no means perfect, which shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. We're just a month in. And the good news about this is it's all quite transparent. So this notion of block construction that used to be very opaque and controlled by entities no one was even familiar with is now known entities. There's public dashboards. There's things you can go see and look, and the groups are talking to each other. So in many ways, I think it's much more healthy for the ecosystem and really quite interesting as a participant in the middle of all of this. And we can get into how it works and what's interesting about each piece if you want to.
Yeah. I do want to get into like the next evolutions of MEV in terms of MEV redistribution, MEV decentralization. First, to clarify, sure, like kind of the picture you've painted here, and just correct me if I'm wrong here. My understanding of MEV in the proposer, builder, validator network, the block builders compete against one another to sequence the block, and claim the MEV that's available in that block. Whichever block builder kind of wins this auction or this competition, that they build the block, and then there's a validator that comes in and validates that block for correctness or some sort of confirmation on the chain to make sure that it settles correctly. And that the proposer at the tip of the chain had the benefit of building the block as well as proposing it and claimed all of the MEV. Now with MEV boost and proposer builder separation, it allows a marketplace of blocks to compete for the tip of the chain for proposers to propose to validators.
So do you want clarification? Are you asking for clarification?
Yeah, I just want to confirm that that's okay. An accurate depiction of the network.
Yes, and I'll just to clarify a little bit. So you run a validator, you're staking your 32 ETH to do so. Every so often you get selected to be part of what's known as a committee, which is like, hey, your job is to, this committee's job is to propose blocks to the network and then basically attest to them or sort of verify them. Within that committee of sort of validators, you might get selected to be the proposer. You enter, it's sometimes called God mode. You're the tip of the chain and you get to decide what the next block will contain. And then other members of the committee basically validate that. And what they do, it's called a test. And they attest to the veracity of that and then it gets included. And there's a sequence of things that happen where it becomes then enshrined in what's known as an epic, right? So every 12 seconds this happens. So it's one of the changes with proof of stake, whereas before block times were variable. Under proof of stake, block times are fixed. So every 12 seconds this happens. That's 5 times a minute. That's 300 times an hour, 7,200 times a day, 2.6 million times per year. This process sort of repeats itself. Now, when
12 seconds, a node broadcasts the tip of the chain to the rest of the nodes in the network, and they all reflect and attest the tip of the chain to one another.
Every 12 seconds, a new block gets added to the chain. Okay, and so we're talking about this action of at the end of the 12 seconds, a new block is going to get added. By the way, this is called what's known as a slot. This is the new language for this. And either that slot is going to be empty, i.e. nobody does it, or there's a bunch of transactions which gets included. Okay, so this validator, which is a distinct entity, a unique address, at that moment in time, they have the responsibility to the network to construct and to suggest a block. And they can do that themselves. They can operate their own software and get their own thing and do it. Or via MEV Boost, they can outsource that. And they can say, you know what? We're going to just ask some expert to give us the best block right now. And how we're going to decide on what that best block is all these various experts are going to make bids. Okay. And so Rob proposes a block and it's 0.1 ETH of value that they're bidding. And Andy makes a bid, which is 0.2 ETH. And Matt proposes a block, which is 0.3 ETH, right? And the validator just says they don't really care. They just pick the most valuable block and they say 0.3 ETH is greater than 0.2 or 0.1. So I'm going to take Matt's block. So basically like an agreement gets formed where Matt agrees to pay the proposer, the validator at the tip of the chain, 0.3 ETH. And in return, Matt hands over the block body, and the proposer is the one who then submits that to the chain as the contents of the next block. Okay, that's how it works. Now, why would Matt do this?
In this example, Andy, myself, and Matt, we're all block builders.
Correct. We're competing against each other. We're trying to build valuable blocks, right? Now, the value of the block might be 0.35 ETH. Okay. Matt has bid 0.3 ETH, so there's a delta of 0.05 ETH that Matt captures, okay? So this is the delta between the bid that Matt makes and the value in the block associated with all the ordering and what gets in and what doesn't. And by the way, there's many factors that contribute to that. That represents the economic opportunity which is available to the builder, okay? And AKA, so the idea
MEV,
here...
The extractable value.
Well, so there's many forms of value. MEV is one of the forms of value, but what you look at when you look at the contents of the block, often MEV is the most valuable piece, right? So that's where the most games get played, if you will. And so the idea here is you create a new economic market for block builders. Block building requires specialized expertise and non-trivial amounts of infrastructure. So we have significant bills we pay in order to do it. And if we're good at our job, we can make margin every 12 seconds. Now, interestingly, so far, that's not really how it's working. That's so far, 100% of the value, most of the time, all the value goes to the validator. So the block builders, for the most part, are not really extracting any value yet, though it's sort of in the formative stages of this market. So it's certainly possible that will not be the case moving forward. And there are different ways you can create value in a block. So one form of value is which transactions are included in their priority fees. So when someone submits a transaction to Ethereum, it has to include gas. There are two components of gas. There's the base fee that gets burned. This is part of EIP 1559. And then a priority fee, which is known as the miner tip. Of course, there's no miners now. Is it the validator tip or is it the builder tip? I think there's an interesting conversation to be had around that. And what you're trying to do is collect as many of those high value transactions as possible and squeeze them into a block up to the gas limit, the maximum possible amount of gas in a block. And that's one form of value. Okay. There's another form of value, which is MEV, which is MEV involves, putting in transactions in a certain order for a certain outcome. So let's say Andy is conducting a transaction. It's a trade on a certain liquidity pool. And what happens as a result of that is there's an imbalance in the pool, or that the price is going to shift on one exchange relative to another exchange. Okay. And this creates what's known as arbitrage, because now you have price differentials, that the exchange between asset A and asset B over here on Balancer is different than over here on Uniswap. And someone who's known as a searcher, and a searcher is sort of an interesting name because it sounds like a person, but it's really a bot. So searchers are people who build automated systems that detect these sorts of opportunities and then try to capture them. And so the secret here is if you're trying to capture Andy's arbitrage opportunity, the only way to be sure you're going to capture it is if your transaction is sequenced immediately behind Andy's. So a searcher might say, well, Andy's trade is going to create a price imbalance of $200 of value, okay? And if I can slide my transaction in there, there's $200 to be captured. I'll bid $100 for that placement to capture $200 to me and keep the difference, which is $100 to the searcher. So in this example, $200 ARB, there's the searcher bid, the cost of that preferential placement is $100. And in return, the searcher keeps $100, right? Then we have other searchers who bid on that same opportunity. They might bid more, or they might bid less, right? And there's this competition between the searchers. And so what the builders are doing is they're aggregating what are called searcher bundles, like all of these bids, trying to figure out which ones they can include without creating conflict, right? Meaning they can accept bid A but not bid B because they're both going for the same opportunity. One of them are going to succeed. And then you're using that as another form of adding value to the block and building more competitive blocks. They're called MEV bundles. And then the third form of adding value would be unique transaction that you have access to that nobody else does through things like private transaction networks or proprietary order flow, which is somewhat controversial. But the game is, as a block builder, you're using all these various techniques in order to build the most valuable block, to then bid the price to win the block, and ideally, down the line, to capture some margin to fund your operations and to build a sustainable block building business so that you can continue to do so in the future.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
It does. I want to clarify again, and then we can get into like the redistribution of that delta, sure. and how the searcher value flows through to the other elements in the network. So in this case, the builder is also the sequencer who can sequence the transactions and fit one transaction in the slot in front to capture an arbitrage. Is that right?
Yeah. So the act of building is the act of sequencing, right? So as a block builder, you decide, or you decide which transactions get included in the block, and in what sequence, right? That those two things are intrinsically interlinked. And that is what makes a builder, right? And so the whole idea is being a good builder is being good, that each one of these areas requires competencies to do effectively and to do quickly and to do reliably. Because remember, every 12 seconds, there's a new auction that's basically the clock gets restarted, which is one of the super interesting and fun parts of this. Like, we just lost this auction. Oh, well, next option's coming up. Let's keep going, right? So it requires very high scale, very reliable infrastructure to be effective at. And it's not easy to operate in these ecosystems. So it does require, specialized skills. So yeah, to your point, sequencing and block building are arguably the same thing.
Got it. And there's multiple parts to the maximum extractable value to generate from these blocks. There's the arbitrage that exists from front running, back running, or sandwiching, which are essentially the arbitrage opportunities of sequencing the block. And there's the delta that is available to block builders by bidding profitably on these blocks. Or more, I probably should say the right to sequence these blocks. And is there other aspects? I think you mentioned three. I see clearly the two. One, value in sequencing the block, value in bidding on the block. Is there a third element of value to that block builders extract?
Sure. So sources of value in a block. So transaction inclusion, you want to put the most high value transactions in, okay? Mm-hmm. Which generally the source of that is a public mempool, and that sounds like an easy problem, but it is not. There's a lot of nuance that goes into being effective at doing that well. The second source of value is MEV. So MEV is sequencing, right? And generally there's talked about three primary forms of MEV, but there's actually many more than that. So one would be liquidations. So for instance, an Oracle updates as a result of an Oracle update, there are collateralized loan positions which become available for liquidation. You're trying to get your transaction in right after the Oracle update in order to perform those liquidations. This is what's generally known as beneficial MEV because it ensures the orderly operation of collateralized lending protocols. And basically, if those systems are going to work, you need liquidations to happen, promptly, and this does that, right? The next form of MEV is what's known as generally arbitrage or backrunning, which is sort of benign MEV, meaning nobody's harmed by it. Andy makes a trade. There is some arbitrage that happens. Someone takes advantage of that, but Andy doesn't suffer any less favorable settlement. Okay. And the third form of MEV is what's known as toxic or malicious forms of MEV, which are like sandwich attacks or front running, where Andy does something and a searcher will sandwich, meaning put a transaction just before or just after, or will front run, will basically put a transaction in front. And as a result of that, Andy receives less favorable settlement, or Andy gets no settlement at all. So you imagine you might have front running in a big NFT drop, right? Where you're trying to get in and be part of a mint, and people basically look at what's going on and they shove their transactions in on top, and you miss out. You're like, dang, it's like trying to get tickets on Ticketmaster for a big concert, and you're like, wow, I tried to win the lottery and I didn't. It's like the lottery was rigged. There's folks out there who have preferential access and they buy everything up, and you're just going to have to buy in the secondary market for 3 times the price, and that doesn't feel very good, right? In many ways, this is why this is known as toxic or malicious MEV, and there's sort of various opinions about that. There are other more exotic forms of MEV, like multi-block MEV. So MEV that occurs across blocks. There's cross-chain MEV executed via bridges. And so the domain of MEV is quite large and quite complicated. And this is why you have specialized actors who do that, right? So there's this whole category of entities called searchers who have various MEV strategies, and they compete with each other to do so. So that's category 2. Category 3 is what's known as, sort of unique transactions. So Rob, Matt, and Andy are all block builders. We're all trying to build the best block. We all have access to the same transactions in the public mempool, so we go toe-to-toe on that. Maybe we all have access to the same searcher bundles. We go toe-to-toe on that. But Andy has some side relationships where, let's say, Andy will offer private mempool services. So Andy gets transactions that neither Rob or Matt get. And that therefore Andy can build blocks that neither Rob or Matt can, because Andy has transactions that we don't, Okay, these are quite common today in the form of what are known as private mempools, but they're also, it gets a little bit nefarious with what's known as proprietary order flow. So Andy has relationships with certain traders, and he has agreements with them where he will put their transactions on chain if they give them to him uniquely. And so what this creates is sort of a balkanization where now Andy has an advantage that Rob and Matt don't have. The network gets less transparent. And so in general, these sorts of proprietary order flow based systems are perceived as not particularly healthy for the network and generally discouraged. But there's nothing to prevent them, and there are certainly groups out there that are actively experimenting with them. And there's good economic reason to do so. So I think one of the big open questions around the block building ecosystem is how much of an issue will proprietary order flow be, and what are some mechanisms to detect that and to mitigate that moving forward. But as with everything, this is an unfolding process and debate. But so again, to back up, there's three sources of value: which transactions get in, public mempool, which searcher bundles you have and the value associated with them, and what sort of unique transaction sets or proprietary order flow might you have that others don't have. And these three things all combine to create a block of a certain value, and then you compete toe to toe. And often all of these things are happening simultaneously. So it's not like, there's one trump card that one player has. It's like all this stuff is happening simultaneously. And again, every 12 seconds, there's a new auction to participate in. And then, the thing about this is all transparent. You can go to mevboost.org. You can see how many validators support MEV Boost. You can see which relays are relaying these blocks. We're number 3 or number 4, depending on when you look, which builders are building which blocks, how valuable the blocks are. So the good news is there's vastly more transparency in this ecosystem than there has been before.
This is crazy. It's like a whole economy happening of blockchains that obviously the common folk wouldn't even have any idea, but Rob and I are deep in DeFi, and this is about as in depth that I've heard about kind of the implications of Ethereum merge since. And so it's just it's nuts to have a business specializing in this right now. Matt is just, talk about just being in the right spot at the right time. But being from a profitable kind of speculating perspective, I do a lot of trading on MetaMask on different applications. So I've got a few kind of practical questions if you can share some alpha here. So I guess the first one is if I needed to get a transaction through quicker, and this is one of the easier ones, I can get into the better ones, is the priority fee more important necessarily than the base fee? If I jack that priority fee up to 4, 5, 6, and keep the base fee pretty much what the suggestion is that going to basically get me ahead, or is it, I guess, yeah, that's the question. Is that more important?
So we, by the way, BlockNative operates what's widely regarded as the most accurate gas estimator in the ecosystem. You can find that at gas.blocknative.com, and we have browser plugins for Chrome, Brave, and Firefox as well. And how we actually build that, how that works is pretty interesting. So we have this sort of comprehensive view of the public mempool. We have global infrastructure that captures transactions all over the world, brings them back, and runs them through real-time ML models. We use AI to look at the contents of the mempool and say which transactions are likely to be in the next block. And then to say, if you want to get a transaction in the next block with a certain degree of confidence, how do you need to structure your transaction to ensure inclusion? And this is a Goldilocks problem, because if you underprice your transaction, you're less likely to be included and you won't get the performance that you want. And if you overprice your transaction, you just waste money and erode profits because it's not going to go any faster, right? So there's this really interesting sort of zone you're trying to be in structuring the transactions. To answer your question is, of course, it depends, okay? So without the appropriate base fee, you're not a candidate for inclusion. So if you set the base fee too low, you're out of the game until the base fee comes down. So getting the base fee too low is really detrimental. There is no way to overpay the base fee, though. The network charges the base fee. So you can set your base fee at 50,000, and if the base fee right now is 20, you'll get charged 20. Okay, so there's no advantage to being or disadvantage to being over. You only get charged what the base fee is, and again, then that goes and gets burned by the network, and is one of the things that reduces ETH supply. The priority fee that sits on top is what's known as the miner tip. And under different circumstances, the miner tip can matter more or less. And so in particular, during periods of high network congestion, when a lot of people are trying to get in, okay, The base fee has algorithms that basically it can only rise so fast. The maximum it can rise is 12.5% per block. And so what'll happen when things get hectic on the network is the base fee can't keep up. And so the priority fee jumps. And you can see this on our gas estimator. We have historic trends there. There are times where the base fee or the priority fee is like 1,000 or 2,000 even sometimes. And so, if you want to ensure that you're going to get on chain in an orderly way, the first thing you got to say is, what's the state of the mempool? Is it calm or is it congested, right? And then you can structure your transaction based on that. Certainly the priority fee is basically the fee that you pay to a builder to include your transaction. The higher that is, the more likely you're going to get their attention. But again, you don't want to overdo it and completely overpay. The part that gets tricky is, let's say there's a major NFT drop or there's some major DeFi event. The other thing that happens is the price of ETH collapses. ETH is off 5%. Oracles are updating, liquidations are happening, people are trying to defend their positions. And so, there's a lot of competition for block space. The real time when the priority fees can get really wild really quickly. And so in those circumstances, you're going to have a much larger priority fee in order to get included, but how much larger you need to use a gas estimator like ours to figure that out. That make sense?
Yeah, yep, it does.
Good.
And I've had some interesting experiments where I've jacked the priority fee way up quite a few times. So it's definitely worked out in my favor. And I also noticed what you said, which I think is a common misconception, that if you just jack the base fee up, regardless of what it is, you'll just get basically the highest level of what it actually is for that block, which is, it's usually much less than what you jack it up as. But I've also found that when you do jack it up, you do get filled quicker because you do basically represent yourself as willing to pay more in that scenario. Now, another kind of like speculation and kind of from a make money on chain for our community is a lot of people in our community, ourselves, just all over the entire space are staking ETH with Lido or Rocket Pool or even as advanced as doing their own kind of node on their own. Now, you've talked in depth about how just by being a validator, you don't necessarily get all the you don't reap all the benefits of MEV and using MEV boost, these types of things. So is there a way for, let's say, like the average Joe who's staking on Lido or who wants to stake Ethereum to also get the validator or to also get the MEV kind of on top of the validator staking fees?
It's a good question. I'm not super familiar with the inner workings of Lido or Rocket Pool. I know both do support MEV boost, but not all of their validators do. So there may be a mechanism to declare when you stake that you want to use MEV boost and participate in MEV rewards. Or if you're a self-staker, if you're operating your own rig at home, I would very much encourage you to add MEV boost. And then what you need to do once you add MEV boost, which is fairly easy to configure, you need to add relays. So this is basically the sources of transaction that you pay attention to. And what I would encourage folks to do is employ a diversity of relays. The relays are published publicly. And interestingly, and not insignificantly, even though MEV boost is produced by Flashbots, they don't default include their own relay. You got to manually add it yourself. But there's a bunch of advantages to supporting multiple relays, and I would encourage everybody to support the BlockNative relay, and we call it Dreamboat. And there's a bunch of interesting and unique things that ours does that others don't do that can improve yield across the board. But just in general, as a staker, this will be expressed in yields, right? So what you're going to be doing is trying to figure out where you get maximum yield, and it's pretty well established already by now. If you're going to get maximum yield, you're going to be getting maximum value blocks, and the way you get maximum value blocks is by using MEV boost in the relay network. So under the covers, most folks will be doing this if they're trying to maximize yield anyways.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I figured that a lot of these services or ones that would like to compete in the coming months to years will just have to integrate. So that's exciting. Now, last thing, this is a little bit more of like a prediction or kind of looking forward over the next 6 months to a year. What's one of your extremely bullish takes on Ethereum and kind of the deflationary aspects kind of how you see the merge playing out, right? Because what we're seeing right now is like very low levels of activity in DeFi. If we return to even half of what we had, I mean, it's going to be insane how deflationary ETH is going to be. So I've kind of spilled the beans a little bit, but walk us through kind of what you might see or what you're expecting with EIP 1559, the merge, triple halvening kind of for ETH price, or just kind of user base growth, all that.
So I like to say, like, I'm a technologist, not a trader. Trader's going to trade, price is going to price. But I think the merge establishes pretty clearly that Ethereum can ship, right? Maybe Ethereum's not great at calling dates because the merge was 6 months away for 4 years. But it's pretty hard to bet against. When the Ethereum ecosystem sets its mind to achieving certain technical milestones, it's pretty proven to do so, and that makes it quite different. And so, just a macro level. I never bet against innovation. Innovation is like a force of gravity, which is every single day, every single minute, every single second, the technology gets faster, cheaper, and smaller. Right? It doesn't matter if it's phones, if it's airplanes, if it's blockchains, right? And once that innovation flywheel gets started, it's effectively unstoppable. And that innovation flywheel is alive and well in Ethereum. The thing to realize is there's the merge, and then there's the surge, and then there's the burge, and then there's the purge, and then there's the splurge. And these are like big groupings of major upgrades to the network that are all planned moving forward. People are always surprised to hear that. They thought the merge was the end of the road. Like, no, the merge is just a waypoint. It's a milestone on the way. And there are equally ambitious, maybe not equally, but still very ambitious upgrades to the network that are coming. That seems pretty bullish for encouraging and fostering academic research and innovation on Ethereum, bringing more participants in, bringing more investment and more innovation that does things like reduce complexity so it's easier for more users to be a part of. Much of the coming upgrades, particularly the next one's called the Surge, it's all about L2 scalability, so you can get more transactions going through the network at lower price. And so now you can start to do things that you couldn't do before. Because you have block building and there's this new sort of programmable element to the network, there's whole new experiences that can be built up there. So I think we're on the verge of a golden era of innovation in the Ethereum ecosystem, and this will drive just a huge amount of new experiences to have. One would think that would then drive engagement, transaction volume, transaction value, and therefore be net constructive to the price of ETH. One of the things which is amazing about the economic model is as the network gets more active, it dynamically balances its rate of issuance and sometimes can get deflationary. So the more successful it is as a network, the lower and even negative rates of issuance start to happen. So for ETH holders, one would expect price to go up. But there's so many factors out there right now, including a very uncertain macroeconomic situation, it's sort of tough to tell. But, my advice is stay heads down, stay building, stay active. Web3 is a full context sport, and it's proven time and time again that the biggest rewards are those who are given to those who are most active, right? And so I would encourage your listeners to continue to be active in the category and to stay on top of all the innovation, because our brightest days are in front of us without any question. And we're super excited to be building in this category, and we know many, many, many others that are. For those of you who are not super technical, the largest technical event of the year is called DevCon. That just happened in Bogota. And it was an incredibly optimistic and collaborative event from all accounts. And so I think it sets the stage for a whole bunch of really positive developments on the network moving forward. So anyways, I'm of course long ETH, but my time horizon is measured in many years, not many months.
Very cool. I like the Web3 is a contact sport meme that, proposers contacting builders, contacting, validators, and bouncing into each other with the gravity of MEV just pulling them into, one sphere or the other. And I think, the Ethereum virtual machine has built the resolution mechanism for determining whether or not these which blocks are profitable, the censorship resistant ones, non-censorship resistant ones. The EVM has been built in a way that supports both and kind of provides a competitive landscape for them to combat each other. I think I've got tons of questions. Like, and on, you know, Andy asked a great question about how like solo stakers can extract MEV. And I think that opens an entire can of worms as far as MEV redistribution and how there's organizations like Flashbots who are decentralizing the MEV distribution, that value distribution, rather than open that can of worms now towards the end of this podcast. We'll save it for another time. Maybe we could close on some of the learnings that you had from DevCon. What were your major takeaways? Maybe some realizations or breakthroughs that you had as a result of one of the most technical conferences of the year.
So a couple different thoughts. So first off, you have the supply chain where value starts with users conducting transaction, flows downhill, and the MEV has historically flowed downhill, and it's flowed downhill to miners, and now is flowing downhill to validators. But because you have block building and because you have programmable infrastructure, you can redirect this value in new and different ways. And one of the things that we at BlockNative and now increasingly others, which we're really excited about, are advocating for is, the value of the MEV originates with the user conducting a transaction with a dApp and a protocol and a wallet. And today, the users are not made aware or participate in that MEV. And so, hey, in the block building reality, you can create recirculation effects where the MEV value can be returned, or some portions can be returned to users' wallets, dApps, and protocols, which we think is really net constructive for the ecosystem. And we're really excited to hear many of the thought leaders in the ecosystem, thinking deeply and proposing solutions to this. So that's pretty exciting. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be at MEV. At DevCon. I had some family commitments, but we had team members there. And you can listen to all the recordings. This is the other thing about the Ethereum Foundation. It's just remarkably transparent. So if you were not able to be in Bogota, you can get many of the benefits you needed from it. And there were, some very large number of sessions that were focused on MEV and focused on PBS and proposer builder separation. There's a number of side conversations, and by all accounts, it was one of the top topics of the entire session. And so MEV has sort of been a fringe discussion and sort of a dark shadows discussion, if you will. And it's very much coming into the light and coming into the forefront, which we think is really constructive. Our worldview is MEV is not something for end users to worry about. It's something for intelligent infrastructure to deal with on users' behalf. And we now have all these new expressive ways for the infrastructure to do so. And again, that's super exciting for entities like us who are active in the category. But I just think in general, like the values of the Ethereum ecosystem are holding true. And at the core of the network, there is not there's not disagreements or negative debates or fractures that you see in many other ecosystems. We see in broader society as well. I think what we have is a fairly cohesive and values aligned set of really intelligent folks. We don't agree on everything. We debate things fiercely, but at the end of the day, we all want a maximally decentralized, maximally participatory, credibly neutral next economy, and we're all committed to helping to build that. It's challenging, particularly in the face of some of the developments that are out there today, but that's what makes it an interesting thing for really capable people to do. So I look forward to continuing that conversation down the line. Okay.
Sweet. Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you for joining the podcast. This was a great learning experience about MEV and the entire Ethereum network, and about the healthy competition that Ethereum supports and encourages, and helps to create this landscape of healthy competition around the entire network, which is really cool to see these experiments in decentralization and censorship resistance play out. And it's really exciting times ahead to see these experiments play out. Look forward to having you on the show once again.
Absolutely. Appreciate being here. Appreciate everybody listening. If you want to follow me, I'm at M Cutler on Twitter, and you can find BlockNative at blocknative.com or at BlockNative. And really appreciate having me on, and happy to come back in the future if appropriate. Okay.
Thanks, Matt.